Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. We are here today to discuss the companions from the new Ikoria set. Now, what can't be disputed is that these cards are disrupting Magic the Gathering. What's up for debate is whether that disruption is a good or bad thing. So first of all, conceptually, what are companions supposed to be? Well, from a flavor standpoint, the idea of a companion is really cool. This is your friend. This is something that's a step above the normal construct or creatures that you summon. Now, for me, I'm an old school planeswalker, which means like way back in the early days of Magic, where the creatures you summon are the real creatures. You're literally pulling them across the blind eternities from different planes of existence to help you in your battles. Like, it's real, as opposed to the new concept of creatures being constructs that wizards create from memory or whatever. Like, that to me isn't as exciting. So I view the companion as this is the real deal. This isn't some made up construct. This is a real living, breathing creature that you have found out in your journeys, and it has become your friend. You know, like it's like old G.I. Joe. You've got Snake Eyes, and he's got like a fox and a falcon, whatever. It might have been a wolf. I don't know. Either way, cool animal companions. That's just a neat concept. So in terms of the flavor of companions, I think they're fantastic. And the fact that mechanically they restrict what your deck is kind of works in a way where when you have a pet, it causes you to adjust your life around it, right? You take it out for walks, you have to make sure you procure food for it, all these different things. If it's an aquatic creature, you have to make sure you actually create an environment for it to exist in. Either way, these have an impact on how you exist. So the idea that this would influence your deck, which is your way of going about your life as a planeswalker, all of your magic and everything, that makes perfect sense. Now, from a mechanical standpoint, companions are a very weird thing indeed. This is the first time something like this has ever been attempted. A creature that exists outside of your deck and like almost outside of the game in its normal circumstances is now a thing, with us having 10 different options for these companions. We've seen companions showing up in every format already, to the point where people are already clamoring, going, oh my God, you can get a Black Lotus back with this one every turn and gain a bunch of mana. I'll be real, in terms of like the oldest formats like Vintage, where there's already a million insane cards, adding one more insane card is just, what difference does it really make? That to me is the most minimal aspect. So the companions have considerable abilities built into the card. They do have the deck restrictions, but they have other unspoken abilities essentially that aren't printed on the card, but are consistent across the board for every companion, in that they exist in their own special companion zone or the sideboard. It depends on how you're playing. If you're playing competitively, then you will have, and you're using sideboards, then the card exists inside the sideboard. If you're playing casually with formats that don't use sideboards, then it just exists in its own companion zone. So companions exist as an 8th extra card in your starting hand, essentially, right? But it's also protected. So it's over there. It exists, and you can cast it at the same time you could normally cast any creature or any other like artifact, whatever. It's like sorcery speed deal, right? Because none of these companions currently have flash. So you can cast them regularly, but it sits in your hand in a way where it can't be messed with. Your opponent can't get rid of it. There's nothing you can do about a companion until it hits the board, because it exists in the other zone. Now, I'm not talking about the companion versions you put in your regular deck. Obviously, any of those you draw in your starting hand, this doesn't apply to. Just the one copy that exists outside of the game. So it's untouchable, but it's also guaranteed. So you know you will have this card every time. Now, Magic uses a couple of different balancing factors to create the environment where things work properly, right? Obviously, the biggest balancing factor of Magic the Gathering is the casting cost of cards. That's how you keep the power level of things relative, where you go, okay, only certain colors have these abilities, so you restrict those abilities via the casting cost. And you can only get so much for so much mana. That's why there aren't spells that cost 1 mana and do 20 damage. Just one red, do 20 damage to any target. Game's over. That sort of balancing factor is very, very, very important. And it can be done in a number of ways or not done at all. One of the most classic example to me of a game where they just threw balancing right out the window was Spellfire, where creature pump spells in Spellfire are free. There's no casting cost for them. So basically, what do you want to use? The biggest, best creature pump spells. Well, every time a new set came along, they just made bigger and bigger creature pump spells. Here's a 5, here's a 7, here's a 9, here's an 11. So you always had to chase after them, and it led to a very unbalanced environment where if you didn't buy the newest cards, the power imbalance was too large, and you literally couldn't even play the game. That's like the really bad end of the balancing spectrum. Magic has a good balance setup, and I mean, there are other examples of interesting balancing mechanic concepts where Keyforge dispensed with the casting cost concept altogether, but it's balanced by a limited ecosystem of each deck being pre-built and you having to play it for what it is with no ability to change it. So even if you do have like some powerful cards, there's no way to truly like push it over to the top and abuse that power level. So Magic uses a couple things to balance. One is casting cost, and another is the random nature of the game. And by that I mean you shuffle up your deck and you get random cards every time. You're not guaranteed to get any particular cards, right? That's why combo decks don't always dominate. If you got to build your starting hand, if you got to choose what you would start with, that would wildly change the way that Magic operates and would change the face of all the formats, as combo decks would become clearly a lot more powerful as I've got all the pieces I need and the pieces to protect it. Here we go. I think that if you could do it in that way, that Magic would pretty much just be comboed. But that is balanced out to a degree by the random nature of Magic. Magic isn't static like chess, where you can have the same sequence and you're guaranteed to have the same pieces at the beginning, right? It's a lot more randomized and dynamic than that. But the companion mechanic steps outside that and says, you're always going to have this card. You're guaranteed to have this one piece every game, no matter what. You'll never have to dig for it. You'll never wonder if you're going to be able to get access to it. Yes, you do still have to get the mana to cast them, but that is a very minor issue. So they do mess with the balance of the game in terms of just offering you additional consistency, just almost free of charge, depending on the companion, because the companion restrictions are varied in power level, right? We've got a situation where some companion restrictions are a lot more difficult to deal with. The ones that say you can only play odd cards are the only ones you can only play even cards, versus a companion that says all your permanents have to cost 2 or less. That's a lot easier to slot something into, as we've already seen with the Cat Oven deck and the Lurus card that basically goes, just make a couple tweaks to your deck and you're good to go. So the problem becomes the fact that companions aren't universal, but by not everybody, basically not universal, I mean, not everybody is going to have a deck that can take advantage of companions. But by not taking advantage of companions, you're putting yourself at a significant statistic disadvantage to your opponent. Honestly, if you want to put it in a pretty simple way to conceptualize it, every time you mulligan, your hand is going down by 1 card. Why does it suck to mulligan? Because you're losing a significant portion of your resources. The advantage of mulligan is you can get rid of a hand that is untenable and unplayable. But you're doing that by giving up 1 of your 7 cards. One full 7th of your hand obliterated just like that. And you know you're already on the back heel. You've lost at least 10% of your win factor right there. The odds go from maybe 50-50 to 60-40. I'm just making these numbers up. If you're somebody who pays attention to like specific standard and this and that and the numbers don't make sense, I'm just using these as generalized examples to make this point. But mulliganing from 7 to 6 basically increases the chances that you are going to lose. Well, if your opponent is playing a companion and you're not, that's like you've been auto-mulliganed once, because your opponent automatically has an extra card up on you, knows that they're going to have what they need. It's pretty much exactly that. So it comes to the point where if you want to play competitively, you can't afford to allow yourself to be auto-mulliganed. What does this mean? this means you almost are guaranteed to require a companion to be on equal footing. But the problem with that becomes not all the companions are born equal. As I said, they have a number of different restrictions, and some are way easier to work with. What does this do? It pushes towards less and less diversity in terms of decks. So it's going to basically push other formats into the same wheelhouse as Standard. Standard, when you boil it down most of the time, is, if you're lucky, 3 or 4 different decks that are good enough to be the decks that are going to win. They're the king decks that are all slapping it out at the top going, let's do this sort of thing, right? So that sort of situation is already very limited in Standard. But with Modern, how many of these different companions actually fit into decks reasonably? The restrictions are wildly varying in terms of the requirements. I mean, are you going to take a singleton deck into a Standard tournament? Are you going to take a singleton deck into a Modern tournament? I mean, singleton maybe more when you get closer to Vintage, just because with all the restricted cards, instead of banning cards there, they tend to just restrict them. So I mean, maybe then, but the Lurus Lotus stuff is just too nuts to ignore. I mean, especially if you get the first turn Lotus, sack it, put out the Lurus, get my Lotus back. Like, that's juicy and dumb. But I do want to reiterate that I don't care about Vintage. Vintage is like the old crazy playground where things should be crazy. Let things be absolutely nuts. So the idea is that Wizards is, as to get back to the title of the video, the concept of companions being disruptive, that's their intention with these. Wizards had a couple of different intentions from my perspective with what they wanted to cause with companion. One is disrupt all of the formats. And another, which kind of falls into the disrupting but not in the same way, is Commander, where they wanted to basically add a 101st slot to Commander decks so they could sell Commander players more product, right? But they also want cards that disrupt Vintage, Legacy, Modern, Pioneer. They're looking to do that intentionally. They've pretty much come directly out and said that with their new Fire development technique, where they don't spend as much time testing cards and push the envelope to get things out there in an attempt to keep things more exciting and, more importantly, have cards that reach outside of Standard. They've said that was their intent. Now, they've succeeded wildly with Companions, and the question becomes, is Companion going to become a permanent part of Magic? Was this an Ikoria one-off, or are they going to see that essentially they've made Companions almost mandatory through this forced mulligan scenario where it makes you on the back foot where you're down by 1 card? Are they going to see that and go, wow, enough people feel forced to play with Companions that we'll just keep making Companions? I don't know if Wizards already has a plan to continue cranking out Companions or originally saw this as a one-shot, but I think in terms of the disruptive nature of Companions, that Wizards of the Coast is going to view this as a win and push further with this companion concept. Now, in all fairness, from my position, I only really care about my cube. And that's a crazy singleton box of cards that I have. It's not a draft cube. I have a video on it if you want more information. But either way, that's what I mainly focus on. So for me, the companion cards don't really make a difference to my existence. I only play cube and Standard. And Standard is always only going to ever be a handful of decks. But it feels like if Wizards doesn't print more companions, the way that they've disrupted the older formats with these cards is going to we're in 2 scenarios. Either Wizards is pretty much just going to have to ban companions as a concept across the board for Modern, Vintage, these older formats, or they're going to have to embrace companions and push it as a permanent thing where every set you will see new companions the same way every set we see new planeswalkers. And I have a sneaking suspicion that we are going to be moving into a world where companions become a permanent part of Magic. So the long-term effects of this obviously have yet to be seen. That's my opinion on the subject. I am very curious because this is something like Magic is a gigantic beast with a ton of moving pieces. And we all just kind of step back and see different parts of it. So I know there are going to be people who share the same opinions as me. I know there are going to be people who are going to be yelling like, you don't know what you're talking about, my companions are the worst, all this sort of thing. Either way, share your opinions. Let me know what you think. I do read every single comment left on every one of my videos. Thanks for coming by, everybody. If you'd like a laugh, I am linking a video from my second channel where we're just messing around and having a fantastic time. So if for some reason hearing about companions like this has brought you down, you're not feeling in a great mood, come on over to my second channel. I will put a smile on your face, I guarantee it. So, big shout out to my patrons and channel members. Thank you very much for supporting what I do here. It means a lot to me. And I will see all of you lovely people very soon.